this point in time, and I will be coming back to introduce our speaker today, but at this point in time, it is certainly my privilege to introduce someone who is very special to Pearl River Community College and to this campus specifically, and that is our college president, Dr. William Lewis. So if you will, help me welcome him.
Good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
We really appreciate you coming out and helping us celebrate this very special event on our campus. We host this each and every year, it's a great privilege for us this year to honor Dr. Ruckel as our Humanities Instructor of the Year for Pearl River Community College, and ask him to present this lecture. And I'm here not only to congratulate him and to welcome you on behalf of the college, but also one of the great honors that I've had over the last several years has been to serve as a member of the Board of Directors for the Mississippi Humanities Council. It's been a great experience for me, and I've had an opportunity to travel all over the state and be in very special events like this. These events, sponsored by the Mississippi Humanities Council, are occurring at colleges and universities all over the state during the months of October and November. So we're not the only ones that are participating in this. Most of the colleges and universities in the state honor one of the members of the faculty, of the humanities faculty, and ask them to present a lecture every year. And there's a little bit of a stipend that goes along with that, a little honorarium that goes with it. And then also in February, there's a really nice banquet that honors all of these humanities faculty from all over the state. And Dr. Ruckel will receive a special recognition at that statewide banquet in February. But I want to thank you for coming and celebrating humanities with us this morning, and to hear Dr. Ruckel's lecture, but also in particular to come and honor him this morning as Pearl River Community College's Humanities Instructor of the Year. So having said that, let me welcome you again. Thank you for all for coming this morning and being part of this very special event.
I believe he raised it another inch or two. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Ruckel, but before I do that, I have a couple of people who are from our main campus at Poplarville that I would be remiss if I did not recognize them and thank them for their attendance here today. Dr. Martha Lou Smith is in the audience somewhere. She is our Vice President for General Education and Technology Services back here. Thank you for coming. And Mr. Ron Haig is going to be filming this. He's director of our museum and with the Public Relations Department, and this will go in our archives. So Dr. Ruckel will be able to come back and view this, 20 years from now and critique himself. But let me just begin by telling you we're privileged to have Dr. Ruckel as a faculty member here. He is a native of Ohio. Now, he did not explain in his little biographical sketch exactly how he got to South Mississippi, other than his family moved here several years ago. He's a graduate of Oak Grove High School in Lamar County in 1984. He has a BA degree from Trinity University in San Diego, Texas, English, History, and Secondary Education. He has a master in the teaching of languages from the University of Southern Mississippi in 1993, a master's of arts from the University of Southern Mississippi in American history in 1997. He has a PhD from Louisiana State University in American history, which was awarded in 2006. Dr. Ruckel has had a variety of experiences, which I think you will all find interesting. He was a teacher at Oak Grove Attendance Center. He's taught at the University of Southern Mississippi, Baton Rouge Community College, Louisiana State University, Texas A&M University, Mississippi Virtual Community College, and he was one of the first teachers there since the inception of Mississippi's Virtual Community College in 2000. He's been with PRCC since 1996, teaching English, Histories, and Honors. And he has a little closing remark at the foot of his sign-off on an email that says, "and 1,000 other useful things." And I think that is significant because Dr. Ruckel does 1,000 other useful things here for the college and for its students. He lives in Lamar County with his wife of 16 years, Dr. Terry Ruckel, who is also a faculty member here. He has 5 stepchildren and soon to be 6 grandchildren. He's an active member of the First Baptist Church of Olo, Mississippi, and is an ordained minister. Now, I told Dr. Ruckel I would pretty well stick to my script and not ad-lib too much, but I'm going to tell you, Dr. Ruckel reminds me a great deal of a quote that I have on my door at my office. The quote is by Mark Twain, and I want to share it with you. Mark Twain says, "It is noble to teach oneself, but it is nobler still to teach others." And I thank Dr. Ruckel for being a teacher with Pearl River Community College. Let's welcome him now as he brings his address.
Thank you, Dr. Burt, Dr. Lewis. Thank you all for being here. I won't talk too long. There's food. I told Terry that I was aiming for 20 minutes, and she laughed. Those of you who've been in my classes know why she laughed. But I'll try. I've been serving as an educator, a professional educator, since 1988. When I went to school to be a student in Texas, it was a real opportunity for me. Times were very hard then. My family didn't have the means to send me to college, and I knew that. Can everyone hear? No, I'm here. I'm getting my Office of Crazy Eighters in the back are giving me all kinds of assistance. Is that better? Here? Okay. I didn't have the opportunity to have it paid for and had to learn a lot. My parents were great, but all the financial aid and all those kinds of things were a real mystery. And so in 1984, when I received a scholarship, it was like my work in high school had been to try to earn a scholarship to have school paid for. And I know that many of you are doing that and have done that, and I want to commend you for that. And I just feel standing here today that in some way it's the culmination of years and years of devotion from faculty, from fellow students, from my colleagues here on this campus. Made it possible for me to receive an award. It's very meaningful to me. So thank you all for being here. All right, well, this project began a long time ago, and it's still an interest of mine. It began as part of my master's thesis project at the University of Southern Mississippi, and I'm going to read part of that, altered now, rewritten for you as a kind of an overview, and the project has to do with Italian immigration to the Mississippi Delta. Now, how many of you have heard of Italian immigration? How many of you have heard of Italians coming to the United States? How many of you have heard of Italians in Mississippi? Some. It's gotten some attention, but most people, when they think of Italians in the United States, we think of New York, Chicago, right? We think of the mafia. We have a Godfather. The Petro Motors has a Godfather commercial that's out now. You know, so we have a lot of stereotypes and ideas about immigration and Italians and so on. But this project is a little different. It looks at the way that a worldwide event, a massive event of immigration, played out in a sort of out-of-the-way place like Mississippi, and helps us learn something about this place. So I'm going to provide an overview and then a lot of examples with some pictures, and we'll go from there. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about doing the project. I hope some of you will get interested in doing history, the humanities, and literature. My little tag says, and 1,000 other useful things, because I'm of the mind that what seems to be so impractical, English, literature, religion, philosophy, language, history, really is eminently the greatest of all practical studies. It's how we guess our way through life. We study uncertainty, ambiguity, difficult situations, it's difficult to get information about. And by studying history, we learn other people's ways of dealing with the difficulties of life, and we have conversation with them, and we find commonality with them in a way that we can't always do with the people that are alive and with us here today or in the same circumstances that we're in. So I hope that you get a little bit of that from today, and I'll move on now. Next slide, please. That was funny. I thought it was funny. As you can see here, a quote from one of the most interesting people I never had the opportunity to meet, someone with whom I've had a conversation now for a long time, even though he's passed on and I never did meet him, Joseph Emilio Ricany, he was one of the people who came to America from Italy and then wrote his life story, even though he did not have an education much beyond the 5th grade. He'd always wanted to be a writer and a priest, and he's a pretty good writer. On October 24th, 1906, 21-year-old Joseph Emilio Ricany boarded a ship at Genoa, Italy, bound for America. He did not leave because he was embittered against his homeland. He did not leave thinking he would return soon. By his own admission, he left Italy simply because he had decided to do so. Although grand economic and social factors helped nudge Ricany off of the Italian peninsula, he believed that he acted under his own recognizance and in his own best interest. As the ship headed away from home into an unknown future, young Ricany lamented, "Farewell, land of flowers, of sun, of happiness, of love. Farewell, land of saints, geniuses, inventors, poets, painters, sculptors, engineers, teacher of culture, civilizer of peoples, old and modern, farewell." Isn't that great? He never saw his mother again, never saw most of his family again, and not bad for a guy with a 5th grade education, huh? Unlike hundreds of thousands of his country's men and women, Joseph Ricany never intended to make what they called American money in order to return to become a landowner in Italy. That's what a lot of these Italians wanted to do. Just make enough money, go home, buy land, and become somebody at home. Nor did he plan to join one of the immigrant communities burgeoning in labor-hungry American cities. Instead, Ricany, along with a few hundred others, made his way deliberately to the cotton fields of the Arkansas and Mississippi Delta, a place that, unbeknownst to him, was touting itself as a verdant paradise, the world's greatest garden, and even as the Garden of Eden. One of the funny things I ran across was a newspaper article in the Atlanta Constitution. They were trying so hard to attract immigrants to come to Mississippi that they had a scientific study, they said, archaeologists had unearthed evidence right outside of Yazoo City, Mississippi, that incontrovertibly proved that the real original source of the site of the Garden of Eden was actually located in Yazoo, Mississippi. And if you would just come here, this is published in the newspaper. There was a real effort there. Ricany, when he came here, he met and married his wife. He fathered 11 children. He worked, he sweated, and he was able finally to say, "All my children had a pretty good harvest last year. All are settled, some on my land, some on their own. All own something and are well started." And can you see there the American dream, and hence the title? This project is really about how Italians are an example of people who want to find in life that success, that opportunity, that in my history classes we call it the main chance in life, your destiny, your pursuit of happiness. And here he is saying very clearly what he thought that was. All of my children had a pretty good harvest last year. All are settled, some on my land, some on their own, all own something, and all are well started. People will do anything to make life better for their children. They'll endure any amount of sacrifice, difficulty, pain, and privation in order to make things better for their children. Thus, Joseph Ricany, who had only a few years of schooling but who wished all his life to be a writer, eloquently expressed his profound satisfaction. Everything changes, and today we have accomplished things that seemed impossible at one time. With the help of God, today we own our own piece of land. For Ricany and the other Italian families who immigrated to the Mississippi Delta, land ownership was the truest measure for success and a promise that only the Delta could keep, which is not what most people would think. Ironically, the American mind has little experience with immigration to rural places, believing that the nation's diverse ethnic wealth belongs only to our cities. Of America's geographic and cultural sections, the South attracted the least number of immigrants, and of the South's many rural areas, the Mississippi Delta, perhaps the most infamously harsh, exploitive, and isolated, should have attracted no one. Seemingly a region awash in a kind of distilled cultural swill, the postbellum Delta had possessed in the minds of many Americans all the worst flavors of American failure. In the Delta, one's color, one's parentage mattered. The test of a good citizen was often his ability to discriminate between shades of acceptable and unacceptable conduct, relationships, or lineage. Why then would any outsider test such a region for his own prosperity? With entrenched white families jealously guarding the Delta's only redeeming feature, its precious cotton-growing earth, few could imagine the Delta as fertile soil for an immigrant's American dream. Without industry, without cities, loaded with a homegrown labor force of former slaves, the birthplace of the blues seemingly had little to offer compared to Chicago, New York, San Francisco, and so on. The secret of this Delta garden, however, a secret whispered in scattered oral histories, hidden in dusty census records and lovingly preserved in family trunks full of photographs, reveals the immigrants that did come, not by the hundreds of thousands, but in a diversity rivaling that of most major American cities. Although the state's entire foreign-born population never constituted more than a thin cushion between our native whites and blacks. By 1900, the Delta possessed Irish, Welsh, and German immigrants, had also attracted larger numbers of Eastern European and Russian Jews, Chinese, and Italians. The single largest collection of Chinese outside of a major city, we usually think of San Francisco or New York, but outside of a city, the single largest Chinese in a rural area was in Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta. And many of them still have family roots and ties there. By 1920, eventually I think the Wing family became the mayors of one town in the Delta, two brothers. By 1920, Italians made up 23% of the state's foreign-born white population, and most of those lived in the Delta. Unfortunately, because these Italian immigrants did not arrive in dramatic numbers and did not drastically alter Delta society, they go unnoticed among the tangle of other stories for space in Delta history. Because the true meaning of the Italian experience in the Delta could not be expressed by trumpeting their large numbers or exalting their, quote, contributions to Delta life. Their story has either been passed over or used as a way to understand the Delta or Mississippi or race relations or other things, and not just to understand and tell their story. Although historians have found, and this has changed recently, historians have found little interest in the Delta Italian story itself. The Italians have been picked up and used in a great book that came out about the 1927 river flood, another great book called The Most Southern Place on Earth, which is a history of the Delta itself. But individuals and institutions on both sides of the Atlantic who thought that they could make use of Italian immigration began to imagine scenarios that would ostensibly serve both their interests and the interests of the immigrants. These different authors of the Italians' fates offered the Italians scripted roles as major players, but the plot always left the Italian part of a larger scheme and not an actor in his own right. In other words, the Italian government, the Catholic Church, the American government, the planners, everybody sort of had a plan for these immigrants. The state of Mississippi had a plan for them, wanted to fit them into their dream, if you will, their plan for success, and they thought these Italians would be a tool, an instrument, a way that they could do this. The Italian government, the New South, the Catholic Church, and American reformers all wrote scripts casting the Italians as nationalists, as a solution to labor or race problems, as extension of the church's waning temporal and spiritual influence, and as examples of the benefits of progressive government programs. Instead, Italians cast themselves in their own version of the drama, writing for themselves great parts that included independent movement, their own ideas, a financial and social platform for better lives for their children, and above all, land or a business property. According to their own understanding, they saw the Delta as the most likely place to bring to fruition the dreams that they had, and they were right. In order to understand the meaning of the Delta Italian experience, the historian needs to define such loaded terms that aren't as popular anymore as success and the American dream. We have to define them in terms of the Italians' expectations. What did they want? What did they think they could accomplish? What they thought they would find in the Delta, grafted onto what they actually did find, watered by their inner motivations. All would grow to become the tree, which is their story. Their effort to find the economic and social salvation so many modern people have sought. It's a tall order, certainly, and one that requires an investigation of the other plans that were available, the different possibilities that existed at the time. The degree to which Italians did or did not stick to the scripts that their would-be benefactors offered them reveals much about the immigrants' inner discussions, their own conversations about right and wrong, hopes and fears and best bets. In fact, the story they wrote for themselves, unusual for its fullness of completion and lack of deterrent by so many outside interests, reveals a great deal about the way that people order their lives after a purpose that usually involves dreams, rooted in everyday practicalities like operating a business or working land of one's own. Do you all have a dream? Do you all have an American dream? Do you all you're in school because you want to better yourself, you want to make life better for your family, you want to fulfill a promise to your parents or an obligation that you have, and the community college is the place to do that. By the way, don't forget to graduate. Graduate. All right. 3 ambitions: the significance of immigration to the Delta, a reappraisal of the Delta's character, a true retelling of the Italian story told for the immigrants' sake, if for no one else's. These considerations drive this story. A belief in the power of dreams and the power of myths underwrites this story's speculations. I just believe that people have dreams, and their ambitions, their desires drive them forward even through impossible and difficult circumstances. And also that people, no matter whether they're literate, no matter how humble they are in their circumstances, have a story they want to tell and deserve to have that story told on its own terms from their point of view. Now, at this point, I want to just talk a little bit about doing history, what it was like to do this project, and I hope that some of you will get interested in it. First, the people that I wanted to study were illiterate. So if you ever pick a history project, please pick people who can write so that they leave letters and things behind. No, don't do that. Choose the people that have a story that are interesting to you. But these people, once I got into the project, I realized most of them could not read nor write and had left very few letters, which is the stock and trade of historians. It's been joked that historians make their living by reading other people's mail, usually the mail left behind by people who are dead. So that's how we know what people thought. And then I discovered Joseph Ricany's autobiography that his family treasured. His grandson was the head of the physical plant at USM, and the family was interested in someone looking at his work. He had written it after the 1940s. They'd kept it, had it professionally translated, and he had, by the time he got done adding to it, I believe it was about 300 pages of an autobiography. It's the story of his life, and that's what he called it, the story of my life, which helped me greatly as a student to be able to read, to keep that as kind of a center and have his experiences there. But you also might sympathize with his statement, right? For why am I doing all this? Why does this have value? It helps us learn about the experiences that other people have had and learn from them. Here's a map of the Delta, just in case everyone's not clear on where it is. You can see the inset map far up there on the left. It involves many of these counties. I did a lot of work in Bolivar County especially, and in and out and around Greenville, Cleveland, and Clarksdale, Mississippi, Shaw, Mississippi, and places like that. Here is the other source of information for an historian besides letters and memoirs left behind. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a U.S. Census book from 1910. And back in the good old days, they walked around this book, and each detail of each category that was asked for by the government was recorded with an ink fountain pen. And this is what I spent a lot of time doing, was reading through just page by page by page by page through the census records, looking for individuals who were not born in the United States. And if you look over here on the right-hand column, you see one column that has a few notations there, a little double entry column. You can see there are people there who are from Russia, from Italy, and Eastern Europe. And the Catholic Church was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience, and the Catholic officials were tremendously helpful in this project. It was a great experience. We had just been married, Terry and I, and we met with Father Canonici in Jackson, and he said, well, you should go to the Ursuline Convent. Some of you will go in the spring to New Orleans on the tour, the college-wide tour of the French Quarter, and you can walk down and even take a tour of the Ursuline Convent. It is the oldest structure in the entire Mississippi Valley. The next oldest is right around the corner from it is Jean Lafitte's, the pirate, Jean Lafitte's blacksmith shop, which is, I think, a bar now. And it's a close second, but they're there. This is a great opportunity. Charles Nolan, the archivist, opened this on a Saturday. We came in, he taught us how to use the archive. And it's the Catholic Church that really invented, it's the Catholic Church that centuries ago began keeping records, began keeping track. And not only for projects like this, but for example, if you're African American and you're interested in your heritage, Natchez, Mississippi was a Spanish provincial capital for a while, and in the courthouse, I believe it was, at Natchez, there are all these Catholic records that were there for a time that were records of baptisms for slaves and so on. So the Catholic Church is tremendously important in doing history for people who themselves may not have left a lot of written records behind. And then the Diocese of Jackson, which has did at that time have a great vault down in the basement with a great big locking wheel, and was able to go in there and read reports that priests had written. So because the priests had reported on their flock, was able to get some sense of what was going on and read between the lines sometimes to learn about the life and the quality of life experiences of these folks who not all had the ability to write for themselves. And then oral histories. And another reason I chose this project for this award is that it's through organizations like the Mississippi Endowment for the Humanities that oral history projects are financed. And these, in the 1970s, a group of folks, I believe with a grant, began to realize that a number of these immigrants had died off or were dying off or were getting older, and they started to do oral history interviews and collect their stories. So interviews that were done in the 1970s were available for me in the public libraries of Greenville and Clarksdale and Cleveland, Mississippi, where I could go and listen to these interviews of people who no longer were with us and learn about their memories growing up in the Delta and their accounts of their parents and so on. We have a project like that here. It's called Vet to Vet, where we encourage our student veterans to do interviews with other student veterans to collect their stories, because we don't know who needs them and we don't want them to perish. We want to collect these things. So ordinary history done by ordinary people about ordinary events can be very extraordinary when you start to learn about their experiences. And you really haven't lived until you've gone to the Italian Club in Greenville, Mississippi, sat in the back room around a round table with 6 or 8 Italians and have them argue about who's the most Italian and who had a worse experience, and it was really quite an experience. Though one individual asserted that he and his family possessed the knife that was used to assassinate the chief of police in New Orleans, one of the first mafia. I think he was killed by shotgun blast. But anyway, they had, it was quite a discussion that we had about Italian history, heritage, food culture, and so on. So it's a great experience. And then at the time, I didn't realize it until I was preparing for this, that they had actually said in their historical marker that they erected, that this reference to the American dream. Just one of the many parts of Mississippi legend and culture now today, Doe's Restaurant. Have any of you been to Greenville, Mississippi and eaten at Doe's? Get a shirt that says Eat at Doe's. Rock stars, celebrities, entertainers, political figures from all over come to Greenville, Mississippi expressly for the purpose of eating at Doe's Restaurant, where you can get steak and spaghetti. They used to serve it out the back by bucketfuls, I think. Began as an Italian grocery and store and then became a restaurant. It's supposedly on the culinary bucket list of 100 things you must eat before you die. So I hope that some of you will take a trip up there. And one of the interviews that I got to do myself was with Father Canonici, Monsignor of the Catholic Church, who now has come forward with his own book, his account of these experiences, and lots of pictures. And I have more pictures to go on the next section that will sort of go along with things that we're talking about. And what I want to do now is let you in on their experiences. I'm just going to recount to you some of the experiences that these individuals had, and let you experience as many of their own words as I can, so that they can tell you their story and you can enjoy them as much as I have. You should realize that this is part of a worldwide trend, that around the end of the 19th century, as industry grew in American cities, that there was a great hunger for labor, that many American cities and states created immigration agencies and agents who went to Europe and sometimes embellished their claims of what was possible to recruit people to come over to work in the factories and to fill out states that people at the time didn't want to live in, quote unquote, like Nebraska, places like that. So Mississippi was afraid, and the southern states were afraid they were missing out on this opportunity, and they also created an immigration agent. I believe the remark in the legislative debate in Mississippi was that repealing the 15th Amendment was never going to work, and the best thing they could do was hire an agent to go recruit labor that would come and compete with black labor in the Delta and make the Delta be something. There's a lot of race mixed in here also. Now here are some accounts of what it was like. Here are the Sicilians were really some of the first Italians to come to America. Some of the first ones to come to America came through New Orleans, through their connection to the Mediterranean, and made their way up the Mississippi. And there's a real distinction between Sicilian Italians and Northern and Central Italians. For many, the search ended at towns in the Mississippi Delta. Seeking a better life, said V.D. Antoni, who had owned a small fleet of fishing vessels in Sicily, left his boats and headed for New Orleans in the 1860s or 70s. After working for a time in and around New Orleans, he eventually settled with his wife and 11 children in Clarksdale, Mississippi in 1897, where he opened a restaurant that would survive 5 generations and be declared a national landmark. His family became known as Coahoma County's first Italians, but not for long. The Tuminello family arrived that same year to open a grocery store, and the Cassio family soon moved to town so that they could begin a candy company. Family by family, Sicilians and other Italians made their way to Mississippi, where the Delta offered the chance to work hard, save up, and buy land. Perhaps Salvador Signa's recollection reveals the most. This is what he said. I don't believe they know how they got there. In other words, when they came here, they were looking for the land of opportunity, and any kind of work that they gave them, why, they were ready to work. They didn't care what kind of tool or instrument they put in their hand. If they were going to get paid for it, you understand, you could tell them they were willing to do anything you wanted them to do. They landed up down there in the damn cane fields in Louisiana, an old man bourgeois plantation, and I was the 4th child, and before I was a year old, we moved from St. Michael's Parish to Vicksburg, Mississippi. For his work in the cane fields, Salvador's father earned 75 cents a day and was allowed, quote, a little shotgun house and a small garden for his family. However, he somehow saved enough money to move to Vicksburg, where he opened a fruit stand. Later, he moved his family to Greenville, where his wife's parents and 3 brothers owned grocery stores and a shoe shop, and where he could buy a grocery from Old Man Rosella, who was another established Greenville Italian. Here are some of the earliest folks to come to Mississippi. You can see the large family, many of them larger than that. This is the older brother of Joseph Ricony. He's one of the reasons that Joseph ends up coming to Mississippi. His brother helps to recruit him, which happens a lot with immigrants, that as they're coming in, they have family, they have somebody who knows them, who encourages them to come and be where they are, so they have a connection and a support system. Just as many of us depend on our families for support systems in difficult times. Here is an Italian homestead or house in Shaw, Mississippi. What a lot of Americans don't understand, that the Delta seems to be southern, like James Cobb's book, The Most Southern Place on Earth. It's the symbol of the South in many ways. But really, the Delta had not been much cleared. It was kind of a jungle. There were black bear and bald eagles that lived there, had a lot of trees. It was a very difficult place to farm. And it was not until just before the Civil War the delta really significantly began to be cleared. So even in 1910, there's a lot of land clearing and work to do that today you can't see. When you go to the delta, it looks all flat and cleared off with little islands of trees. But back then, it was a tremendous amount of work. So it's almost like going to the frontier and constructing your own place. And here are just 3 Italian groceries and businesses that are the type of thing that folks would establish or possibly even buy from each other. And that's one group. So the Sicilians are one group. They sort of come up on their own up the river. As Mr. Signa said, they don't really know for certain how and when exactly they came. It's kind of willy-nilly. But now there's another group that were recruited, that were brought in on purpose. And these are northern and central Italians who were brought in specifically for a project that was going on. And the intention of the project was to create laborers who would be sort of indentured servants. They would work to pay off the cost of their steamship fare, and then eventually maybe they'd be able to own some of their own land, and that's what the Italians want. So they signed contracts for a number of years to work on these plantations, especially one of them, which was Sunnyside Plantation, was in Arkansas, and then it was run by a Mississippi fellow by the name of Leroy Percy, and there were a few other attempts like this in the Delta too. Tony Lubiani immigrated to the Delta Garden from Italy in 1906. He came because a man from Vicksburg, he said, had toured the area near Venice, Italy, in an effort to recruit labor for Mississippi Delta plantations. Lubiani, along with about 40 other families, consented to leave Italy, hoping, they said, to find, this is what he said, pie in the sky and gold at the end of the rainbow. After arriving in Coahoma County, Mississippi, he began the laborious task of working off the cost of his steamship tickets. At about the same time, Teresa Malatesta's mother landed nearly penniless in New York City. Traveling with her 3 young children, she endured the long trip in order to join her husband in Canada, in Winnipeg, where he was working. Once there, the cold and what they called bitter hardships did not agree with the Malatesta family, and they relocated to Sunflower County, Mississippi, at the invitation of relatives who had previously been recruited, and they were cultivating cotton. These stories and many others like them demonstrate the success that Mississippi experienced in attracting the immigration the state and its planters craved. Mississippi's attempts to compete for immigrants accelerated quickly from the initial official actions by the state government, but then soon required the energies of Delta planters like Leroy Percy and Charles Scott. In the end, individuals like Percy and Scott would dramatically affect the experience that these people had in the Mississippi Delta. Sunnyside Plantation, this is just to give you an idea of how this scheme was cooked up. Sunnyside Plantation had begun as efforts to induce immigration to the region leapt ahead. John C. Calhoun, who was the grandson of none other than the great Southern statesman John C. Calhoun, conceived the idea of purchasing old plantations in the area in Arkansas and along the Mississippi River, and he convinced several friends, a wealthy banker, owner of the Long Island Railway of all things, and others to purchase the lands with money that they had raised, and they formed what was called the Sunnyside Company in the 1880s under the state of Connecticut's legal system. You beginning to get the idea? So they create a 10,000-acre plantation that's a corporation that they can use to go and recruit people to come over and work. Well, as you can imagine, it's not long before there are lots of cries of abuse and lots of concerns. As a matter of fact, a number of Italians who are at Sunnyside actually leave and go to a different place in Arkansas and make their own town. They call it Town, named after one of the explorers who was with La Salle, the explorer. And much has been written about that. It attracted a lot of attention at the time. But the Italians on the other side of the river in Mississippi stay and eventually end up being very successful in the Delta. Besides the planters and the state of Mississippi having a plan for these folks, the government of Italy also had a plan for them. Italy, after a while, realized this was a real drain on its resources, and so they have 2 concerns. One, that everybody would be good citizens, and 2, that they would send money home through the wire transfer system. So there was a lot of concern about that. But one of the other Italian sources of interest in these Italians was the church, the Catholic Church. Religion, because of the formation of the country of Italy, religion was not very popular generally in Italy. Many of these people came over wanting to have very little to do with the Catholic Church, and it turns out the church mounts a missionary effort establishes churches, communities, helps make it possible for people to be married and buried and baptized and get an education, establishes hospitals, and the Catholic Church becomes a powerful influence in helping to develop the Mississippi Delta as a result of these Italians coming and then being chased really by the church. So here's a story along those lines. Joseph Ricany sat down in 1941 to write the story of his life as an Italian immigrant. Ricany had longed for an education in Italy, but farm work interfered with his public schooling, and his family could not afford even the clothing required by the parochial schools. For Ricany, the church or emigration were the only choices that would have afforded him an escape from the rural poverty that burdened his family's efforts to better their position in life. After arriving in the Delta, not only did he require, quote, a holy ceremony, but the christenings of all 11 of his children were so significant that he recorded the names of the priests who performed the services. Throughout, Ricany credited God with leading him to the Delta, where in spite of the hard work, he and his brothers were safe from both of the world wars that ensued. Even without benefit of weekly Mass, Ricany trusted God to handle what was often the overwhelming problem of sickness, death, flood, and trouble that came with cotton in the Delta. Proud of this achievement, he considered himself successful when he had enough money saved to purchase a crucifix for the church that was at Shelby, Mississippi, where Father Giacomo Gabrielli had a church that was somewhat neglected. When he decided to marry, he chose Justina Palacini, a native of his own Italian province of Ancona, but she was here in America. She had come to Red Leaf, Arkansas in 1905, just a year before Joseph and his brother themselves had arrived to join their older brother. Upon the advice of Pietro, who was the acting head of the family, and, quote, after many considerations and talks with neighbors and some friends he had known since childhood, Joseph asked Justina to marry him. After only 3 months and an 8-mile cart ride, jolting along muddy roads, the couple arrived late, mud-splattered and surprised to find 2 other Italian couples waiting impatiently at the altar of the church at Sunnyside. The faithful priest, Father Joachim Frank Galloni, who presided over the only Catholic church in the parish, had waited for Ricany because the other couples had not made appointments. All 3 couples were married in a single ceremony, promising new families to God and His church. The main thing, Ricany thought, was to have a holy ceremony with God's blessing. So many of them didn't, by their own admission, didn't think too much of religion or the church, but when they came to a strange place, they found it enormously important to the structure of their lives. And as a result of that, the church was able to follow behind and help develop the Mississippi Delta in a way that might be surprising to many of you. And I'm just going to read a couple of statements from different ones of these folks, from church officials down to the Italian immigrants themselves, and just try to, at this point, let you get a little bit of the flavor of their experiences. America is the land of plenty for all the needy of goodwill. It is the country of hospitality and work, of resources and rehabilitation and of fortunes. All have the opportunity of improving their condition honestly. And that's from a church official. That's Father Giacomo Gambera, who was a Catholic Church missionary to these folks. The Italian ambassador said, if you come to America to make your home here, be Americans, live as Americans, and you will be respected by Americans. Don't come here and live as Italians. See, he was worried that they would make the nation of Italy look bad. Father Bandini, who's the sort of renegade priest missionary who leads these folks out of Sunnyside and the difficulties there, had this to say about Italians living in cities, and instead thought living in the country was really great. They contribute nothing good to American life, Italians living in cities. They gain nothing good from it, neither liberty, education, ideals, nor ability to govern themselves. Instead, they come to believe that democracy is corrupt, liberty a fraud, and that crime is not punished by law as necessary. In other words, this church official is afraid that if folks come and live in cities, they're just going to be corrupted and they're not going to contribute. He wanted them to contribute and gain from their experience. And here's what they said it was like trying to minister to the Italians, especially at first. I heard it said so many times, neither my compare, the banker, my fellow townsman such and such, a doctor or lawyer, the president of the Don Pasquale Society, that crook who made himself rich, my boss, nor many others more fortunate than myself, not even our consul, go to church, and yet I have to go? I, who am a worker, a poor father of a family, have to give money to the parish priest? I, who am the most poor? You see some resistance there, but in the end became very successful. Here's what Father Louis Dutto said of his church in Marigold, Mississippi. I had Mass here last Sunday at which 27 persons were present. The Methodists also had services and just 25 individuals attended it. 52 people out of a population of 1,200 worshiped God last Sunday. It's interesting, the church in Marigold was in some financial difficulty, and the priest went walking down the street, as he put it, knocking on the doors of Chineses, is what he said in Protestants and Chineses knocking on their business doors and asking for donations, and they responded with money that was equal to more than half of his annual salary to contribute money to build the church. And it's just a great example of the spirit of cooperation that develops in these Delta communities between people that are very, very different, and in a time when Mississippi and the Delta in particular are not known for those kinds of interactions. It's really a different version of the story than you hear a lot. This is what a judge in Greenville, Mississippi had to say. The Delta Italians' tremendous energy, their beautiful family life, and above all, their love for America might well be emulated by our own native-born citizens. In other words, he's looking at these immigrants and saying, we ought to learn, we should take a lesson from them. And then here are a couple of my favorites. These have to do with growing up Italian in the Delta, and let you clue in a little bit on Americanization and whether or not folks want to just give up their culture and become Americans. Salvador Signa said, Grandpa didn't speak any English, and he never wanted to learn any English. And if he asked you something in Italian, you had better answer him in Italian. If you didn't, and you were small, you'd get a nice slap. Whack. And then this is, I think, my all-time favorite. His Uncle Paul, Salvador Signa's Uncle Paul, tried to find wine. He really wanted wine to go with his food, and he never could find any good wine in Mississippi, and he didn't like the tobacco either. So finally one day he said, to hell with Mississippi, I'm going to Brooklyn. And he left. Two more quotes, and then I'll close. This one is to give you a sense of what it was like to be a woman in these Italian families working. This is what Joseph Ricany said of his wife 2 months after she died. What a change in my life. What a difference between before and now. She used to take care of everything, house, vegetable garden, chickens. She prepared everything, cooking, clothes. She used to do the washing, ironing, and kept everything clean and neat. She knew her way around, and she could do everything well and quickly. She was fast, very fast. She always took good care of me. I was happy and satisfied. She worked up until the last minute before she died. She had a stroke. And Flowers Pirini said he accounted women who had their babies and then went right back to work. It was Henry Mascagni who said this. He said, Mary Casavecchia was 41, 42, 43 years old. She'd have her baby like on Monday, and on Tuesday she'd go out there and chop cotton or pick cotton or whatever it was. Not only her, but a lot of them. Difficult circumstances. And then finally, this is what Joseph Ricany had to say. I thought this was a great way to sum up his experiences. Trying to make a living, own land and farm in Italy was also fraught with corruption, difficulty, oppression, and so forth. So the Delta experiences have to sort of be balanced out against what it was like in other places, which was hard. And this is what he had to say. Vexations under all those different landlords, how many cursing, how many times I tried to cheat them, and at the end I always was the one to remain cheated. How many times I wished bad things would fall upon them, how many landlords I changed. He's saying, I tried to cheat, they cheated me, I tried to survive, they tried to survive, it was a struggle, and in the end, this is how he summed up his experience. Since my arrival in October-November of 1906 up until 1928, I worked for others that's in somebody else's land as a tenant, from Red Leaf, Arkansas to Ensley, Alabama, the year when the water of the Mississippi overflowed, afterwards to Ensley, Holly Ridge, Mississippi, then Heathman, Shaw, and Cleveland. In 1928, I finished to work for others. I bought a piece of land of my own. In 1929 was the first year I was independent. Now, what happened in 1929? The great stock market crash that was the symptom of the beginning of the Depression. A lot of folks, if you ever talk to your grandparents or great-grandparents or aunts and uncles, you'll have them tell you that the Depression had begun in the South and in Mississippi a long time before it ever hit the United States. But as a result of their hard work and saving their money, the Depression became an opportunity for these folks who purchased a great deal of land, brought the first tractor to Mississippi, is in Shaw, Mississippi, and today are very successful, and their descendants are all around the state and the nation. Thank you for listening. That's all I have.